The chime of protocol echoed once through the chamber, and the dome dimmed to signal the beginning. The grand hall of the Galactic Council fell into a hush, not out of reverence, but the anticipatory hush of a crowd eager for spectacle. From above, through the translucent dome, the galactic core pulsed in gold and violet, a celestial reminder that the galaxy itself was watching. Hundreds of delegates shifted in their seats, arranged in concentric rings around the central projection platform. Crimson robes of the Vailari shimmered under the light. The glinting scales of the Clivac caught the glow like polished chrome. The silken membranes of the Thaya's cranial fins fluttered in response to subtle changes in room temperature. And from the center of the lower tier, a representative from the Solkar Confederation stood with that familiar smirk carved deep into his elongated face. Kotelek, High Envoy of the Solkar, flicked his second eyelid in a show of impatience. His voice, artificially modulated to match council frequencies, dripped with polished contempt. "Well then," he said, spreading his four-fingered hands mockingly, "let us now hear from the humans, experts in surviving where no one else wants to live." The ripple of laughter that followed was sharp and immediate. Delegates from species that had never set foot on a tectonic fault line or braved an unsealed atmosphere chuckled into their translator cuffs. Someone from the Zirian block let out a loud snort that echoed down the stone tiers. Even a few of the neutral chairs allowed themselves a smirk. Dr. Kenji Riordan didn't move. He remained where he stood, hands calmly folded behind his back, expression unreadable. His dark coat, high-collared and sealed at the wrist, bore only a subtle patch. No insignia, no rank. Just the Earth Standard symbol, embossed with silver foil, over his chest. Standing beside him was Commander Dean Schaefer, arms crossed, his frame square and still as stone, eyes tracking the room without movement. Neither of them replied. They didn't need to. The laughter faded in uneasy waves. In the fifth row, a Valari scientist, Dral Tunkir, gave a disapproving shake of his head, his tendrils coiling tightly. On the right flank, Ambassador Ulreth of the Erol Union adjusted her translator band and whispered something to her aide, a known human sympathizer from her homeworld. Even Ambassador Haran of the pragmatic Ryan blinked twice, signaling discomfort. Then a single voice, clear and authoritative, cut the noise. "That will be enough," said Chancellor Senthvar, his voice like stone grinding over steel. The room obeyed at once. Senthvar stood atop the Chancellor's dais, his red-plated armor ceremonial but not decorative. Every scratch on its surface bore witness to centuries of military diplomacy. His species, the Kelmarin, respected directness above all. And when he motioned for silence, silence came. He gestured toward the center ring. "The floor is yours, Dr. Riordan." Riordan nodded once. "Thank you, Chancellor Senthvar. And thank you, members of the Council, for granting us this opportunity to speak." His voice was quiet, measured. No dramatics, no performance. Just precision. Then he turned and lifted one hand. A light blinked blue on his cuff, and the first hologram bloomed to life. 10 meters wide and 6 meters tall, a sphere of burning red and writhing black. Gasps scattered through the hall like dry leaves. On the projection hovered the image of a Class 7 volcanic planet, unnamed by the Council, categorized only by its orbital number. Molten flows, constant electrical discharge, and surface winds clocked at hurricane velocity. The readouts on the side detailed gravity 3 times galactic standard. The Council had classified the world as a dead zone, inhospitable, unviable, unworthy of investment. And yet, there it was, a colony, human-built. Nestled within a canyon cleft by time and magma, its surface domes reinforced with what looked like harvested obsidian and industrial alloy. Beneath the image, annotations appeared in Terran Standard. Population, 4,200. Civilian ratio, 78%. Operational. Since year 114, post-expansion. Status, growing. The chamber fell into an unnatural stillness. Not silence, but the kind of stillness that made every blink feel too loud. Riordan took one step forward. "We call it Hades' Verge," he said evenly. "Built not against the environment, but with it. Our power is geothermal. Our defenses are geological. Our shelters are carved into fault-stable rock formations that redirect tectonic shockwaves." He tapped once, and the hologram shifted to a cutaway view. Subterranean networks extended like veins from the colony core. Agricultural zones, thermal conversion facilities, public housing, all active. "We didn't come to tame nature," Reardon continued. "We came to understand it, and then survive it, adapt to it, eventually master it." In the 8th row, Councillor Threx of the Clivac Alliance leaned forward, his copper plating whirring softly. Another image rotated into view. This time, a frozen exoplanet, its surface torn by wind and magnetic storms. Buried beneath layers of ice and stone was a human facility, its exterior glowing dimly with energy relays. Civilian activity was visible. Workforces in insulated suits moving from point to point, transportation pods weaving beneath the storms. Councillor Nahrin of the Velari, a longtime partner in Earth's scientific exchange, raised his voice. "You extract energy from within tectonic instability. But how do you stabilize the operational center? What safeguards your nexus core from seismic interruption?" Reardon nodded politely. "We don't stabilize it," he said plainly. "We track it. The base migrates, using mobile infrastructure. We design for movement. Instability isn't an obstacle, it's a metric." Whispers followed, some alarmed, some intrigued. Another voice rose, this time from a delegate of the Zora Dominion. Glisa Katra, whose people had suffered severe losses in an attempt to colonize a similar planet 2 cycles ago. "You house civilians in these places? With active seismic zones, atmospheric threats, predatory fauna?" Reardon didn't blink. "It's safer than growing up in a war zone," he replied, voice even colder. "And we've known both." He waited just long enough for the impact to settle. Then, with a subtle flick, he rotated the hologram again, this time to a new colony. The world was purple and green with acidic storms raging across the horizon. And still, human cities clung to the cliffs like barnacles, wind turbines spinning in chaos, farmlands suspended on magnetic platforms above toxic oceans. He gave a half smile, calculated just wide enough to sting. "You call it a dead zone," he said, stepping back slightly. "We call it Tuesday." That was the moment the crowd shifted again. The sharp inhale from the outer rows wasn't surprise. It was insult. Several delegates twitched in their seats. One of the Vailari aides hissed audibly. A Thaya representative fluttered her bioluminescent fins in a pattern the translation hub flagged as disapproval. Councillor Jalen of the Orth Consulate rose halfway, fists clenched at his sides. But before the tension could detonate, Chancellor Senthvar lifted one hand. "Order," he said, with no need to raise his voice. "Dr. Reardon is our guest. Let him finish." Reardon inclined his head toward the Chancellor. He'd expected that line to sting. He'd wanted it to. Because now, the air in the chamber was different. Laughter was gone. What replaced it was a low hum of unsettled attention. Dean Schaefer hadn't moved, not once. But he looked up now, just slightly, and exchanged a glance with Reardon. They had reached the turning point. The mood had cracked, and they hadn't raised their voices once. The next phase would not just be uncomfortable, it would be undeniable, and they were just getting started. A new hologram surged into the center of the chamber, expanding outward in a quiet burst of azure light. It formed a fully immersive, rotating projection of a scorched exoplanet, its surface cratered and glistening with sulfuric rock, cloud layers twisting violently in chemical storms. Around the planet's equator, a pulse of heat signatures flickered in rhythm, human heat signatures. The silence in the grand auditorium had become rigid, like tension stretched across steel. Dr. Kenji Riordan stepped forward again, posture relaxed, his eyes scanning the projection like an engineer reviewing a finished blueprint. The platform rotated slightly, shifting the view inward through dense atmosphere, revealing the architecture buried within the crust. A lattice of corridors, habitation spheres, geothermal cores housed in shock-absorbing suspension vaults. Life, moving in real time. This, Reardon said, is Kepler 99F, designated as Class 9 uninhabitable due to atmospheric corrosion, tectonic instability, and the lack of an electromagnetic field. He tapped his wrist again. The view zoomed into the subterranean chambers. Inside, civilians moved calmly through reinforced tunnels lit by kinetic glow strips. Children ran through a cylindrical classroom rotating for artificial gravity. Agricultural pods filled with nutrient-rich hydrofoam spun quietly in sealed orbits above a lava pocket reservoir. The tags scrolled by with clinical precision. Population, 8,300. Structural integrity, adaptive framework. 3. 1. Thermal load, contained. Security status, stable. We began construction 4 cycles ago, Reardon continued. We did not wait for the planet to change. We changed what it meant to live on it. A new view unrolled. A composite of 6 colonies, each on a world deemed biologically or geophysically lethal by the Council. One sat beneath an acid cloud layer, using drone swarms to redirect rainfall. Another floated in gas giant upper atmospheres, suspended by fusion balloon rings. The most recent, housed inside an asteroid locked in tidal tension between 2 planetary giants, rotated visibly as micro-adjustments were applied to keep structural pressure constant. The room stirred. For some, it was curiosity. For others, growing discomfort. Reardon continued, tone measured. We call this doctrine reverse terraforming. Instead of imposing change on the planet, we impose it on ourselves. Our architecture is the mutation. Our society is the adaptation. A new hologram expanded, a volcanic world in perpetual eruption, a chain of volcanic ridges connected by hardened rail systems. Vents of gas filtered through armored processors, each one pulsing with energy, routed into shielded caverns. The temperature displayed at the colony's outer skin was 970 Kelvin. Inside, stable conditions held at a livable 295 K. Project Terminus, Reardon said. Energy is harvested from active magma flows. Structural domes use phase-shifting polymers that flex with pressure change. We selected this location specifically for its instability. Councillor Dral Tunkir of the Valari rose slowly, his translucent skin tinged violet under stress. He had worked with Terran research teams before, but even he seemed shaken by the scope. You extract power directly from geotectonic stress zones, he said, adjusting the crystalline instrument mounted to his neck. How do you stabilize the core operations with that level of seismic risk? Reardon's answer was swift, as if the question had been anticipated. We don't stabilize it, he said. We migrate with it. Murmurs spread, echoing faintly off the dome. Our structural networks are modular and mobile. Central operations pivot according to fault activity. We don't resist the tremors, we forecast them. The system learns the pattern and adjusts positioning before impact. The instability, he said, glancing at the projection, is part of the infrastructure. Dral's eyes narrowed slightly, impressed, but the next voice cut in sharply from a darker tier. Councillor Farex of the Teshari Dominion, a lean, metallic-shelled species known for colonizing only preconditioned Class 4 worlds, stood with a flick of his bifurcated cloak. You house civilians, he said, children, elders, non-combatants, in zones with active magma, in tectonic corridors. Are you mad or simply reckless? The insult dangled in the air. Reardon didn't flinch. It's safer, he replied, than growing up under orbital bombardment or with insurgents crawling through farmland. And we've raised generations under both. A flash of recognition crossed several faces, those who had read the reports on Earth's early interstellar expansion, on the siege of Haldan's Rift, on the rupture of lunar orbit. He took a moment to let the weight of it hang. Then the projection shifted one last time. It showed a barren rock world, thrashed by high-velocity storms, laced with canyons so deep they reached down to the mantle. The image zeroed in on one of them, where a city hung suspended between the cliffs, anchored by thermal pylons and tension supports. The camera panned across the edge, families walking narrow bridges, armored transport pods zipping beneath acid clouds, signal towers scraping lightning to power water purification cores. "This is a dead zone to you," Reardon said softly. He turned his gaze across the chamber, his eyes locking briefly with Jalen of the Orth Consulate, who remained seated but seethed with visible disapproval. "To us, this is Tuesday." The moment cracked. Several voices rose at once. Counselor Jalen half stood again, mandibles twitching in outrage. A Clivac technician behind him clenched the side of his translation rig. Across the hall, Counselor Shakol of the Thea flickered a bioluminescent protest across her cranial fins. Discomfort now spilled out into posture, breath, muttered words in native dialects. The words weren't just provocative, they were strategic. And Reardon knew it. He studied the crowd's response as a physicist might study aftershock patterns, measuring disruption, cataloging resistance. Then came the steady voice of Chancellor Senthvar once again. "Order," he said more firmly this time. "We will hear the rest." The murmur faded, reluctantly. Riordan offered a small nod of thanks and stepped back into the dimmed ring, handing the platform controls to Schaefer without ceremony. But the tone had changed. The atmosphere now felt volatile, like a current just beneath a steel surface. The room no longer dismissed them. Now it calculated. Some with interest, others with fear. The lights dimmed further with a low harmonic pulse, and the projection ring around the central dais collapsed into a new configuration. A high-contrast hologrid deployed, flat, angular, and sharp-edged, shifting the mood of the room from awe to unease. Commander Dean Schaefer stepped into the center without fanfare. His boots echoed once against the polished obsidian of the platform, and then the room fell still again. His stance was squared, hands behind his back, gaze level. The first projection hit the dome like a silent detonation. A death world, classified C912 by the Council's own charter, a planet with a nitrogen-methane atmosphere, toxic flora, and seismic anomalies capable of splitting continental shelves. The image shimmered as playback began. Tactical overlays appeared, coordinates, timestamps, unit markers. It wasn't a simulation. It was a battlefield. And humans were winning. The feed showed a squad of Terran forward operatives, 15 men, no armor heavier than standard recon gear, positioned beneath a jagged ridgeline. Above them, an alien battalion descended in hovercraft, weapons live, formations tight. These were the Vicari, spindle-thin, spined predators with a rigid doctrine of aerial superiority. They didn't make it 5 minutes. From the ridge, Schaefer's team activated thermal flares. But instead of attacking the craft, they fired downward, into the ground. That's when the creatures appeared. Massive, 6-legged predators burst from the soil, drawn by the seismic pulses. Their translucent hides shimmered with neuroreactive light. They didn't distinguish between human or Vicari. They hunted movement. Within seconds, the landing zone dissolved into carnage. The feed paused. Schaefer's voice cut through the dark like a blade. "Coordinated behavioral triggers," he said. "Species designated Vorex-9, pack-based ambush hunters. We mapped their migration patterns over 3 cycles. Modified bait pheromones. Trained the rhythm of their emergence with localized subsurface detonations." He advanced the footage, then timed the Vicari descent to coincide with their peak aggression cycle. The next clip began. A jungle world under permanent twilight. The air was heavy with ionized fog, obscuring thermal signatures. The camera was fixed from a drone, circling above an alien strike team, Kaldrani elites in full exosuit armor, deploying sonar pikes and plasma nets. They never saw the swarm coming. From the canopy, a living wave of chitin burst downward, small, screeching organisms that clung to metal, drilled into armor, and injected paralytic venom. The Kaldrani scrambled, lost formation, fired blind. It only made things worse. Insects, someone whispered. Schaefer zoomed the footage on one of the deployment crates. It bore the sigil of Earth's 4th Biological Warfare Division. Enzyme-modified locust variants, he said, seeded across 30 hectares 2 months prior, fed on engineered moss until triggered by ultraviolet beacon pulse. No human troops required. The chamber wasn't quiet anymore. Tension bled into the air. Small shifts in posture, murmurs exchanged behind diplomatic field masks. Even the Ural ambassador, known for his steady neutrality, clenched his 3 fingers tighter around the edge of his station. From the left, Dralton Kier of the Valari, earlier impressed by Riordan's precision, now remained frozen, eyes locked on the footage with unreadable concern. Then came the third projection. A rocky basin, arid and cracked. Wind howled over flat canyons. 2 armored columns, alien, heavy-plated, grinding forward with mechanical rhythm. From above, a human scout drone tracked their advance. The terrain looked featureless, until the canyon floor split. Explosions detonated in a precise line. Shock charges dropped weeks earlier into pre-mapped fault fissures. The chain reaction ruptured an entire tectonic plate. The armored convoys vanished into a crevice hundreds of meters wide. Schaefer didn't narrate this one. He just let it run. When the last crawler tumbled into the abyss, he turned to face the council. Councillor Mech of the Ryan Assembly spoke up, his voice rough, metallic but not mocking. These recordings, are they authentic? You used native predators, biological agents, induced seismic shifts, all as tactical strategy? Schaefer nodded once. Yes, every operation was conducted in real conditions, in active zones, under combat pressure. These aren't recon exercises, they're real encounters. Councillor Mech's head tilted slightly. And these creatures, you trained them? Schaefer shook his head. No, we studied them. Manipulated environments, pheromonal tags, feeding schedules. Most of them never even saw us. The environment was our arsenal. A second voice spoke, this one sharper, colder. Councillor Vek Zal of the Othrani Dominion, one of the most conservative seats in the council. Were these actions sanctioned by your governments? Schaefer met the alien's pale compound eyes without blinking. They didn't need to be, he said. They needed to work. Zal didn't respond. He simply retracted into his seat, facial nodes pulsing a slow crimson. Schaefer stepped back once more. Another display appeared, a final chart. It showed loss ratios, human casualties minimal, enemy losses near total, environmental disruption, calculated, localized, reset by follow-up Terra modifiers. He gave the chamber a long look, sweeping from tier to tier. They weren't defeated by us, he said, voice low. They were defeated by the environment. Then, colder still. We just understood it better. A pause. Then came the sound of shifting bodies. Not just among the doubters, but even the allies. Some of the Valari were murmuring among themselves. A Jalen diplomat adjusted his posture, visibly unsettled. From the far gallery, Ambassador Eric Mal from the Clivac Coalition whispered something to his second-in-command, who did not respond. No laughter now, no smirks, just the weight of what they'd seen, and what it meant. A new projection snapped into place with surgical clarity. A full galactic chart appeared, rotating slowly in the center of the chamber. Each planet classified as a death world, lit up in red, hundreds of scattered points glowing across a vast map of star systems. Then came the data. A table unfurled, translucent but massive, hovering across the dome's upper third. Schaefer didn't look at it. He didn't need to. His voice carried with the same calm severity that had silenced the laughter hours earlier. These are your failures. Each line of the table pulsed with a planetary designation, followed by the emblem of the species that had attempted colonization. Beside it, a timeline of efforts: atmospheric manipulation, terrain stabilization, Artificial magnetosphere deployment. Each line ended in red. Abandoned. Lost. Non-viable. The Clivax rigid glyphs glowed beside 3 shattered moons. The Solkar's symbol flickered next to a barren terraforming rig, abandoned mid-cycle. Even the meticulous archives of the Thaya shimmered with a record of retreat from an irradiated gas giant moon. Then, a new overlay emerged, slim but unmistakable. A single Earth insignia, a green checkmark. Below it, habitable, operational, civilian presence confirmed. The chamber reacted with a swell of movement. Whispers, shifting seats, subtle gestures between aides. Even the more composed species, like the Iral or the Valari, watched the data loop again, slower this time. Schaefer broke the silence. You tried to remake the world in your image. We changed ourselves to survive in theirs. He lifted his arm. The table shifted again, now displaying 2 columns. Left, standard colonization protocols from the Council archive. Structured, rigid, dependent on environmental control. Right, human methodology, dynamic inputs, modular construction, threat as resource conversion. Where you sealed the atmosphere, we learned to breathe what was there. Where you redirected gravity, we let it collapse, because we had already trained in it. You built from the outside in, we build from the inside out. Councillor Nereth of the Elun stood from her seat, her form tall and fluid. The Elun were known for their biocrystalline skin and internal neural lattice, an advanced species, emerging as a new technocratic force in the Outer Arms. You used predators, gravity shifts, planetary storms. But what about protection? She asked, her voice layered with harmonic resonance. How do you ensure survival with so many uncontrollable elements? Schaefer didn't hesitate. We don't try to ensure it. We train our people to survive with what's present, not with what we hope to impose. He turned slightly, the projection behind him shifting through images of human structures built into lava tubes, ice crevasses, and salt caverns under crushing atmospheric weight. We don't create conditions, we endure them. That drew silence, but not the stunned kind from earlier. This one was different, heavy, processing. Ambassador Halden of the Iral, pale gray skin, hexagonal eyes, long respected for his role in mediating the first Halvani crisis, leaned forward. He didn't smile, but there was something close to approval in the way his head tilted. Perhaps the mistake, he said, was assuming you wanted to become like us. Schaefer didn't answer. Reardon did. He stepped forward from the periphery, voice still calm but colder now. Not angry, factual. We never tried to be like you, he said. We tried to survive. He paused, eyes locked on Halden. And in doing that, we went farther than you were willing to go. There was a subtle intake of breath from the Thaya delegation, specifically from Councillor Shakol, who now sat very still, her bioluminescence dimmed to black. On her screen, a new dataset was beginning to compile itself in silence. Schaefer let the room breathe for 1 second longer. Then he spoke again. You failed because you thought technology could conquer nature, that it only took more power, more control, more arrogance. He stepped back toward the center of the platform. You failed, he said slowly, because you tried to impose ego on a world. Another tap. The projection collapsed into a full-screen image of a barren world turned green under controlled canopy zones, with human settlements built within sinkholes, not above them. We adapted. Behind Schaefer, emergency diplomatic protocol warnings began to blink in red and amber along the upper rim of the chamber. Silent alarms, automated threat assessments, scanning algorithms adjusting priority tiers. No one moved to disable them. Councillor Threx of the Clivac rose slowly, arms crossed, mechanical joints whirring. What you're describing, he said, voice clipped, is not colonization. It's ideological warfare. Schaefer didn't blink. That's your word, he said. We call it resilience. In the gallery seats above, sub-councillors began receiving discreet instructions from their command networks. One of the Tharnal interpreters whispered into his own sleeve. The Ryan's internal encryption lenses shimmered briefly, a soft relay glow from information being shared rapidly across diplomatic nodes. Now, for the first time, the Council was no longer seeing humans as survivors or upstarts. They were seeing a pattern, and worse, they were seeing an idea. Councillor Mech of the Reen leaned toward Councillor Tunkir and murmured something in low tones. Tunkir didn't reply. His focus was locked on Schaefer's closing image, one final colony etched into the underside of a floating plate of iron crystal, weathering planetary firestorms in silence. From above, the Chancellor's dais remained still, but Chancellor Senthvar was now fully engaged. His gauntlet flickered once, initializing a secondary protocol feed, reserved for security-level reclassification. He didn't stop the humans. He didn't interrupt. But he watched them now like one watches a tectonic fault seconds before the rupture. Something had changed in the room. Not just perception. Fear. Cold. Practical. And very, very late. A pulse of static shimmered across the chamber's perimeter. A diplomatic alert broadcast, sharp and color-coded, erupted into the air like a neural flare. Lights shifted. Translation bands glitched. Security nodes activated in silent bursts above the entrance doors. Councillor Thassa of the Orth had risen mid-projection, her long, feathered frame shaking with restrained fury. Her voice, normally soft and resonant, now cut through the room with brittle rage. That colony, Sector E3 Omicron 4, lies within Orth jurisdiction. Under Council Accord 9, any unregistered development in that region is a breach of sovereign territory. She raised her forearm, and the band on her wrist pulsed red. Instantly, a pair of guards, six-limbed, plated in obsidian black, stepped into the lower gallery from behind one of the structural columns. Their weapons were lowered, but they were active, and watching. The room ignited. Languages collided in a burst of overlapping frequencies as dozens of delegates activated their personal translators and began issuing diplomatic overrides, clarifications, and demands. The hum of layered dialogue became deafening. Sub-council aides moved quickly along the aisles, some arguing with hand gestures, others transmitting silently to remote consular networks. Councillor Joe Verin of the Jaelun, a tall, silver-skinned male known for his icy demeanor, stood so abruptly that he struck the edge of his seat with his leg. He stumbled forward, barely catching himself against the railing. From the second tier, one of his aides, a younger Jalen diplomat, dropped her translation wand as she reached for the diplomatic shield activation protocol. The entire atmosphere changed, not into chaos, but into pressure. Like the sudden stillness before a containment breach. Commander Schaefer didn't raise his voice. He didn't take a step. He simply turned toward Councillor Thassa, hands behind his back, expression unreadable. If we hadn't gone there, he said calmly, that world would still be exactly what it was. Untouched, ignored, left off every list of potential development for the last 70 years. His voice held no apology, no aggression, only fact. You never claimed it for anything but archival purposes. We established a research outpost there to test environmental reaction protocols. It wasn't strategic. It was scientific, to prove a point. Thassa's feathers rippled with fury. Your point is irrelevant under breach of sovereign. Schaefer cut across her, unshaken. The point, he said, is that any world, no matter how extreme, holds potential. And your people had no interest in that place until you realized it could be conquered. We didn't conquer it. We survived it. The silence that followed was immediate. Even the translator nodes held their breath. And then the Chancellor spoke. Chancellor Senthvar didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. But when he leaned forward on his throne, the chamber froze around him. The Orth, he said, eyes locked on Thassa, have made no formal attempt to develop, occupy, or even claim permanent orbital authority over that planet. There is no orbital beacon, no automated relay, and no council-submitted environmental audit on record. He paused. Intent is not ownership, and if you ignored it for a century, it does not belong to you now. Thassa's feathers curled inward. Her arms dropped, fists clenched. But she said nothing. The guards remained at their posts, but did not move. The tension held, fragile and taut. Then Schaefer exhaled slowly, stepped forward, and the weight of the room shifted again, this time not in fear, but in something deeper. Recognition. He raised his head slightly, eyes sweeping the vast tiers of the council dome. You're afraid because we survived places you wouldn't even land on. He didn't shout. He didn't pace. He spoke like he was stating something that should have been obvious all along. On Earth, we climbed mountains that froze our blood. We crossed deserts that blistered flesh from bone. We dove into black oceans that crushed steel. We fought under skies filled with poison and ash. We did it with knives made of stone. Then we did it with engines, then with fire, then with data. He took another step, slower this time. We didn't evolve with safety. We evolved surrounded by things trying to kill us. Images appeared behind him, not holograms now, but historical archive bursts. Montages of human survival. A Sherpa pulling equipment over a glacial ridge with breath fogging into ice. A diver navigating the Mariana Trench in a reinforced shell while the pressure crushed the water around him. A man in ragged clothing crossing a radiation field during the Age of Recovery. A desert technician harvesting solar fuel in a sandstorm while guiding children into shelter domes. Every hostile element you now fear, Schaefer continued, was something our ancestors lived through. Our lungs learned to breathe in thinner air. Our bodies learned to withstand famine. Our skin learned to burn and heal. Our minds learned to adapt, to chaos, to failure, to death. The chamber didn't move. No one spoke. Councillor Holden of the Ural now sat perfectly still, one hand resting on his translation coil, eyes locked on Schaefer with something closer to reverence than scrutiny. Schaefer's tone shifted. Not proud, not cold, just inevitable. You come from equilibrium. You built your worlds in balance. You measure risk before action. He tilted his head. We were never given that choice. Behind him, the projection shifted once more. A final image of an early Terran orbital platform, pieced together in the wake of collapse, lit only by the blue glow of recycled fusion cells. A single flag painted onto its hull, tattered from micrometeor impacts. We learned that survival is a language written in pain, and we speak it fluently. He let that hang. Then, silence. Utter and complete. Even the translators didn't activate. Not because they had nothing to say, but because for the first time everyone in the chamber understood exactly what had been said, and none of them wanted to be the first to speak. A flicker of motion crossed the chamber, barely perceptible, but it shifted the weight of the room. One of the Clivac envoys tapped a command into his data cuff. Another from the Vailari block opened a private transmission relay to their High Council. Across the upper balconies, aides whispered to one another, eyes darting between Schaefer and Reardon, like observers waiting for a system to fail under pressure. But nothing failed. Schaefer stood unmoved in the center of the chaos he had just ignited. Reardon, positioned behind and to the left, took a slow step forward, measured, deliberate. He raised his eyes toward the tiers of delegates now poised in a balance between outrage and dread. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to. What you see as hostile, Reardon began, his voice carrying not through volume but certainty, we see as unfinished. The central projector burst back into motion, now cycling through high-speed clips of human colonies not just surviving, but expanding. Not settlements, but systems. Not outposts, but new models of civilization. A colony embedded in the wall of an asteroid torn open by gravitational torsion. its living quarters rotating in counterphase to maintain balance. A city riding thermals on a gas giant's upper atmosphere, shielded by ion skins, its infrastructure built on electrostatic levitation. A modular complex submerged beneath a methane ocean, tethered to the seafloor by chain-reactive magnetic anchors, drawing power from the pressure itself. "These aren't habitats," Reardon said. "They're statements." Schaefer stepped into the light beside him, eyes scanning the holograms as if verifying a checklist already completed. "Each one was designed not just to endure," he added, "but to redefine the laws of what you call viability." A hum of disagreement buzzed from the Tharnal delegates. Councillor Vek Zal of the Othrani muttered something to his aide, who immediately turned to send a flagged report through their diplomatic feed. In the second tier, Councillor Arvin of the neutral Galari sat hunched over, reviewing the data pouring into his lens feed, hands trembling slightly. Schaefer ignored them. He pointed at a new projection, one of the earliest colonies on Gamma Threx Fiv, a planet so volatile that it shifted magnetic poles every 30 hours. "No terraforming," he said. "No orbital stabilizers. Just shielding inside naturally magnetized caverns. Everything designed to work within the rotation cycle. That world didn't change for us. We moved with it." A Valari observer in the upper row leaned forward, squinting at the scrolling data, and then turned to speak hurriedly with a neighboring diplomat. The murmurs grew again, rising, spreading, clashing. Reardon raised a hand, calling up a side-by-side comparison. Left, council methodology, long-duration atmosphere conversion, orbital shielding, planet-wide reconditioning. Right, human adaptation, localized architecture, symbiotic fauna integration, energy harvesting through dynamic instability. He let the comparison speak for itself. "You didn't fail because your tech wasn't advanced enough," he said. "You failed because your ideas were too rigid." Schaefer tilted his head slightly. "You still think colonization means bending a planet to your will," he said. "But we learned that no world owes us anything. If we're going to stay, we change ourselves." Another wave of voices surged. From the Thaya Enclave, "You're rewriting the principles of galactic settlement." From the Solkar, "This is environmental anarchy masquerading as strategy." From the Orth delegation, "And who regulates this madness?" "Who decides when the cost outweighs survival?" Reardon answered, voice steady. "Those who are willing to pay it." Councillor Mech of the Ryan rose to his full height, his angular frame casting a long silhouette beneath the overhead dome. "Are you saying," he asked carefully, "that no planet is too hostile? That even the most lethal environments can be settled, if you're just willing to suffer enough?" Schaefer's reply was quiet, heavy. "No world is uninhabitable to those who stop needing it to be comfortable." Murmurs became shouting. Projections were dismissed mid-air. Accusations flew between representatives. Someone on the Tharnal side demanded emergency adjudication. A Clivac official threatened to file for diplomatic sanctions. Across the floor, a Valari aide requested real-time environmental scans of currently classified Deathworlds. The chamber fractured. Reardon stepped forward again, raising his hand with the same calm as before. "Not to stop the chaos, to make it irrelevant. You've misunderstood what we are," he said. "You think we're colonists, claimants, survivors." He glanced toward Schaefer, who nodded. "We're not." The projection behind them transformed again. A planetary system unscrolled across the dome, not one that belonged to any known dominion. Not yet. Its primary star glowed a deep orange, shedding brutal radiation. Its first planet, a cratered wasteland with 600-degree surface temperatures and no magnetic field, rotated slowly in synchronous lock. "Every colony," Reardon continued, "is a challenge to what you believe is impossible. Every habitat is a correction to what you considered final." His tone dropped, sharpened. "We're not trying to fit into your systems. We're building something entirely new." Schaefer's voice followed, cold and exact. "Maybe you thought we came here to join you. to be accepted by the council, to prove something. He looked out over the now chaotic chamber. Dozens of species, hundreds of delegates, some shouting, some frantically transmitting, others frozen. But we didn't come here for recognition. He lifted his chin. We came to show you what you missed. A Lerak diplomat, barely audible over the noise, called out, "Are you saying any world is colonizable if humans are involved?" Riordan didn't even look in his direction. "See for yourselves." He raised his hand. The lights dimmed. The shouting collapsed into sudden quiet. A final projection loaded, still concealed behind a veil of encrypted formatting. Only the faint outline of a world remained, waiting. And then the veil dropped. The veil dropped. The chamber held its breath. A dark sphere appeared on the projection, a planetary body scarred by solar radiation, haloed in unstable magnetism, lit unevenly by intense proximity to its star. The image spun slowly, revealing impact craters the size of cities, jagged ridges splitting the crust like torn metal, and, most unsettling, motion. Structures moved across the surface. Massive, angular, fortified complexes riding segmented tracks that extended for kilometers in either direction. They crawled across the jagged terrain, chasing the Terminator line between searing day and killing cold. Towers bristling with thermal vanes and radiation shields rotated in synchronicity. Drones, the size of transports, scouted ahead in coordinated flocks, deploying reflective panels like a living shield between the installation and the unrelenting sun. The image was marked with a simple title, now pulsing across the council dome in quiet defiance. Fort Sol status, active location, Mercury, Sol system. The silence broke like glass. A datapad clattered from a Velari technician's hands. The sound echoed louder than it should have. From the upper gallery, a Thaya aide flinched and instinctively activated her personal shielding, shimmering briefly before she caught herself and disengaged it. Near the Chancellor's throne, Councillor Zal of the Othrani stiffened, his neck plates dilated in alarm. One of the Clivac diplomats stood halfway, voice thin with disbelief. "Which planet is that?" Riordan answered, steady and unshaken. "Mercury." The reaction was immediate. Councillor Virek of the Tharnal emitted a low-frequency hum of warning, his species equivalent of a gasp. Councillor Thassa of the Orth took a single step backward, colliding with her own seat. From across the chamber, Councillor Joe Varon of the Jalen blinked in hard sequence, disoriented, before reaching to stabilize himself on the railing. Schaefer stepped forward into the full glow of the projection. "While you debated the classification of Deathworlds," he said, "we colonized the one place in this system you still consider untouchable." He paused. "The planet where the day itself is a death sentence." The hologram zoomed in, closer, deeper, showing the inner workings of Fort Sol. Underground heat sinks absorbed the solar extremes and redirected the energy into magneto-conversion cores. Convoys of sealed crawler tractors moved along titanium rails, expanding the colony's reach centimeter by centimeter, in rhythm with Mercury's orbital drift. A dynamic rail system, bolted into the crust and continuously repositioned, allowed the entire installation to track the twilight zone between exposure and freezing. Solar mirrors suspended in orbit cast shifting shadows, modulating surface temperatures just enough to buy hours of safe exposure. Atmospheric compression towers expelled radiation-saturated gases and replaced them with pressurized air mixtures piped in from deep storage tanks buried beneath the regolith. Towers bore the Earth insignia, weathered, burned, but visible. A voice from the upper gallery rose, weak and breathless. "That's not possible. The Othrani tried. We lost half our fleet to that rock. It's suicide." Councillor Zal's jaw shifted, but he said nothing. His silence confirmed the truth. Everyone remembered the Othrani campaign, one of the most technologically sophisticated attempts at hostile planetary occupation in recorded history. Their ships melted in orbit. Their drones failed in hours. Their shielding cracked under relentless solar shear. Now humans were not just surviving, but thriving. Riordan pointed to a section of the colony, an educational facility, children in thermal adaptive suits playing in a pressure dome while the outer walls glowed orange with redirected solar radiation. The camera feed was live, time-stamped, real. The chamber fell again into silence, but this time it was worse than before. It wasn't fear, it was realization. Ambassador Halden of the Ural didn't sit back down. He remained standing, arms folded, staring into the projection with narrowed eyes. Councillor Tunkir of the Valari leaned forward, jaw clenched, slowly shaking his head. Not in disbelief, but in resignation. Schaefer looked up at the projection. The view shifted, now showing a massive emblem carved into the central control tower. The symbol of Earth, stylized and sharp, fused with a radiant solar map in motion beneath it. Fort Sol. Track the shadow, claim the heat. Schaefer spoke again. No dramatics, no flourish, just the words, laid bare. While you sat here, debating classifications and charting theoretical limits, we walked onto the surface of Mercury and called it home. No reply came, no demand for clarification, no request for verification. They all believed it now, because they had to. And in that moment, under the silent glow of Fort Sol's orbiting reflection, the entire structure of political power in the Council shifted. Not with war, not with weapons, but with proof. And they couldn't unsee it. The last flicker of Fort Sol's orbital feed faded into the chamber's darkened dome, but the afterimage lingered like a scar. The image had left something behind, etched not on the walls, but in the minds of everyone present. An invisible line had been crossed, and every delegate in the grand auditorium of the Galactic Council knew it. The chamber remained silent. Not the awkward silence of bureaucratic delays or procedural impasses, but the absolute stillness that precedes systemic change. Above them, the projection reformed once more, now centered not on the colony or the drones or the rails, but on a single emblem, burned into the alloy skin of Fort Sol's central command tower. The Terran symbol, forged from human steel, interlocked with the map of Sol's inner system, Mercury's tight, brutal orbit traced in crimson. Around it, the motto gleamed in pulsing amber: Fort Sol, track the shadow, claim the heat. The room didn't breathe, not until Riordan finally spoke. You classify worlds by their hostility, by how much they resist control, by how effectively you can bend them to your expectations. He looked out over the Council's upper tiers, tier after tier of alien leaders frozen in place, unsure whether they were witnessing an act of diplomacy or a quiet conquest. Riordan's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. We don't call them hostile. We call them laboratories, environments, lessons. He let that sink in. Then added, or, as the technicians at Fort Sol like to say. He turned his head slightly toward Schaefer. They exchanged a glance, wordless understanding passing between them. A good start. As if on cue, a quiet but unmistakable tone issued from the data feeds lining the chamber's outer rim. A soft red glow bloomed across dozens of consoles. The Council's centralized diplomatic system had received a verified system-wide update. The Chancellor's terminal lit first. Then the Orth, the Valari, the Thea, the Clivac, all blinking red. The text scrolled across the dome's internal HUD in multiple languages, the standard protocol for planetary military reclassification. Alert. Update to Interstellar Zoning Authority. New military designation, Mercury, Sol System. Access. Status. Restricted diplomatic observation. Suspended risk level. Extreme status. Incursion not recommended. The moment it finished, the auditorium changed. Ambassador Draven of the Keltari stood abruptly and deactivated his alliance node. The soft blue light on his wristband turned black, a symbolic withdrawal of mutual development privileges. Without a word, he turned and exited through the side corridor, his aides scrambling to follow. Counselor Nearith of the Elun did not rise, but her eyes, normally passive, translucent, flashed with a deep internal light, her neural interface flaring. She was already calculating how much her people could learn from this. How many death worlds near Elun space might now be reclassified as viable, with Terran assistance? Counselor Halden of the Eral didn't speak either, but his hand, resting on the edge of his console, now tapped in slow rhythm. Deliberate, thoughtful, tactical. Others reacted with less subtlety. Zal of the Othrani leaned into his comm band and began issuing quiet but urgent instructions. His people had lost half a fleet to Mercury. He would not allow the psychological wound to reopen without response. On the Clivac tier, Counselor Threx slammed his palm into his console hard enough to fracture the screen. Sparks danced from the edge before an aide replaced it. One by one, the old assumptions fractured. Reardon took one final step toward the center of the chamber, where the floor lights framed him in a dim circle of white. "This isn't about Mercury," he said. "Not really." He paused. "This is about the idea that you thought you understood the limits of civilization, that you believed endurance had a boundary, that if something was too hot, too volatile, too distant from comfort, it could be ignored." He looked around the chamber, not accusing, just final. "You were wrong." Schaefer stepped to his side now, his boots hitting the floor with a measured echo. His eyes scanned the crowd, not for approval, not for admiration, but for understanding. And he found it. Among the Eral, among the Valari, among the silent pockets of unaligned sectors that had stayed quiet through the entire session, waiting to see who would blink first. Schaefer spoke just once more. "The environments you ran from," he said, "we adapted to, and now they serve us." No protest rose, no refutation, only acknowledgement. For some, that acknowledgement came in the form of quiet awe. For others, a cold recalibration of threat assessments. For a few, resentment sharpened into strategy. In the highest row, Counselor Hiran of the Reens simply folded his hands, then nodded once. He would need to call a special assembly. The map of power had shifted, and they would need to find their place in it. The chamber lights returned to their neutral setting. The Chancellor remained silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because the Council already knew. This session was over. The game had changed hands. No formal adjournment was given. No votes called. No final declarations. Just the quiet sound of systems updating across the galactic network, and the unmistakable weight of a paradigm snapping into its new shape. Reardon turned without another word and began walking toward the exit ramp at the chamber's base. Schaefer followed, steps aligned, neither hurried nor slow. As they crossed the center of the floor, every species watched them, not with superiority, not with pity, not with disdain, but with the sudden, chilling recognition of something they had failed to notice until it was far too late. Humanity had stopped trying to belong, and the galaxy now had to decide how to respond. Behind them, Fort Sol's emblem remained on the dome's upper shell, glowing against the starscape like a warning flare written in defiance. A shadow carved into sunlight, a signal, a beginning. "Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. Hope you had a great time with the story. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really makes a huge difference to the channel. And hey, I've got something else for you. I've chosen another story that I think you'll really enjoy. Just click the card right here, or hit this one to jump into the full playlist. See you in the next one.